and then once it starts, I will call the meeting to order and do roll call. Alrighty, the official the regular meeting of the Transgender Equity Council will now begin. Before we begin, I'd like to note that this meeting includes the remote participation of members as authorized under Minnesota statute section 13D.021. I do that wrong every time. Due to the declared local health pandemic, the city will be recording and posting this meeting to the city's website and YouTube channel as a means of increasing public access and transparency. Board meetings are public and subject to the Minnesota Open Meeting Law. I will now call this meeting to order and call the roll so that we may verify the presence of a quorum. Kenzie Weller.
Here.
Hunter Williams.
Here.
Billy Kurek.
Here.
Ray Lockman.
Here.
Casey Pavis.
Here.
Galen Mitchell.
Here.
Melissa Berner. Oh, Melissa, you're on mute.
Analysis wasn't cooperating. Here.
Thank you. Becca Sanborn.
Here.
Amazing. I know we are missing Nico, Ash, Destiny, Emma, and Cece right now, but we have 8 members present, so we do have a quorum. And Hunter, I will pass it to you so that we can vote on adopting the agenda and minutes. The only thing I would propose is number 8 on the agenda is a report back from the Office of Violence Prevention meeting, which we had to postpone again, unfortunately. So I would propose removing that item from the agenda, and otherwise I will pass it to you to see if anyone else has any additions or edits, and so that we can approve them.
Sounds good. Good morning. No, I'm just kidding. So I'm wondering if anyone wants to accept the minutes as written, or if they propose any changes to the minutes from our last meeting.
This is Ray. I move to approve.
This is Galen, second.
Awesome. This is track. I'll call the roll to approve agenda and minutes. Kenzie?
Yes.
Hunter?
Yes.
Billy?
Yes.
Ray?
Yes.
Casey?
Yes.
Galen?
Yes.
Melissa?
Yes.
And Becca?
Yes.
Wonderful. There are 8 in favor, none opposed, 5 absent. The motion passes, and both the agenda and minutes are adopted. And I will pass it to Hunter for the next agenda item, which was just holding space to see if anyone had any follow-up questions from Hunter's presentation on deaf culture last month.
Yeah, so this is Hunter. My apologies. So I just wanted to check in to see how everyone's feeling about my presentation about deaf culture. I know this team it's easy for us to have conversations and stuff. So I just wanted to check in to see how everyone's feeling about the new information. Do you feel like that presentation made you a little bit more aware of deaf culture, or do you want some more? Kind of just want to check in and see where people are at.
This is Kenzie. I will say that I really appreciated, Hunta, you taking the time to do that. I've never had a presentation or had any education on deaf culture before, and so I'm very grateful. I was wondering if you had any other resources for myself, for the rest of the TEC to find more education about deaf culture.
Yeah, absolutely. Of course. Of course. Yeah, I'll send out an email with in the new business with some websites that have information about deaf culture. There's all kinds of resources available. So I know that, this is kind of new information for folks at on the TEC, so I'm happy to send out any of that information.
This is Kenzie again. Yes, I would really appreciate that, and thank you again.
Absolutely. If anyone has any questions that they'd rather just ask me one-on-one, that's totally fine. Feel free to reach out to me. I promise I don't bite, I don't bark. Don't hesitate to reach out. I think that's it. If no one else has anything to say, we can move on to the next agenda item. Again, let me know if anyone has any questions, and then I'll turn it to you, Track.
Awesome. I am multitasking, trying to move all the windows at the same time. So we just wanted to take a couple minutes to talk about how the TEC is giving feedback to departments who come in to present. And for context, for the newer folks on the TEC, which is the majority of the folks here tonight, at some point in 2020, and I honestly can't tell you when at this point, the TEC voted on both a list of questions that get sent out that I send out to presenters in advance who are going to be presenting up to the TEC to make sure that they are kind of prepared for their presentation and have a framework of what you all want to hear from them. That I will say very transparently, I'm realizing as I say this right now, I did not send to Nikki, who's presenting today. I think Nikki is the type of person who will be pretty prepared to answer the types of questions you all will have anyway, but that's just a moment of transparency, staff mess up on my end. But voted on a set of questions, and then kind of
November of 2020. This is Hunta, in case it matters.
Amazing. Thank you for specific memory. And then kind of made a decision that what made the most sense is 6 months after a given presentation, I would reach back out to the person who had made that presentation to ask, to kind of be like, reminder, here are the recommendations the TEC gave you. What feedback have you made on those? And ask them for updates. And then the co-chairs and I, based on those updates, could decide if it made sense for that person to come back and present again. If you all had more feedback you might want to give to them, if there were things I should just send you out via email, etc. And the last thing is I made a folder in the SharePoint, or in the presenters folder in the SharePoint site, which you hopefully all have access to now. There is a document that is just tracking specifically like what I hear back from presenters when I do that 6 months later follow-up. So that is kind of the structure we've built out so far to create what Shore, who was on the TEC until very recently, was calling kind of like a feedback loop with presenters. Like, how is it not this one-off thing, but they're in ongoing relationship with us? And the co-chairs and I wanted to pose the question to you all of, does that work? Are there other pieces we're missing? Other ways that you want updates from me about what those presenters are working on now? What is the best way for you all to keep departments who come in and present accountable to your feedback? And is there more infrastructure we want to set up to create that?
This is Galen. It's hard for me to say how I would change it when I'm so new to it and I haven't really seen it play out personally. So I wonder if someone who has been around and like has actually reviewed some of the feedback and seen how it's gone has an opinion on it. Because I'm guessing that those of us who are new are probably just
This is Hunter. So in 2020, we had feedback collected and then was sent out and, made changes repeatedly to the process, to what happened. And then in September of 2020 is when we really made this new change, this new setup to collect feedback at the 6 months and like Track explained. So to be honest with you, this is kind of constantly a work in progress. And I imagine it will continue to be. And as things go, we might make changes to make improvements. Yeah, we're always, collecting feedback. But I think it's kind of, like I said, it's an ongoing thing. And it's a little bit hard sometimes, depending on, each presenter too. So, for example, last year, there was a presenter came that was pretty traumatizing and triggering. And that kind of woke us up to figure out, okay, what are we going to do? How can we improve this process? And that kind of instigated these, new questions and everything being added for the presenters. So we've gone through quite a few changes and yeah, I don't know. And Track, is there anything else you want to add to give any other context to help new folks?
I think the only other thing I'll say, and Galen, excellent point that many of you haven't actually gotten to experience this yet, but is just that, like, I know nobody's hanging out on SharePoint all the time, and so I can like send an email update or put something in the agenda with what I hear back when I check in with folks after 6 months, as well as storing it in the SharePoint. But just don't know what feels like the method of getting that information where that like helps us best track who we need to ask for more or something like that. And so the SharePoint is an attempt to have a place for you to reference it. I know you're probably not going to go looking for it all the time there, but I'm trying to figure out. Yeah, that's what I'll add. I'll stop there because I'm rambling.
Hi, this is Becca, BECCA. I'm really glad for all the work that's been done on this ahead of time. So I appreciate everyone who's been on the council and been staff before. I really like the idea that we prepare our guests with some context of what is appropriate and helpful to share with us. And I'm glad we have a process for, that follow-up, that closing the loop and maintaining a long-term relationship. So I'm happy to see this continue. And as Hunta, you said, it's an ongoing process. So I'm sure we'll learn more as we go and evolve that process.
Hey, Track, this is Ray. In terms of, I somehow missed or forgot that you were posting those updates. So to your point, like what would be the best way to notify us that something changed or there's something to go read? I don't necessarily think it needs to be an agenda item. I'm not against that, but it could also work when you send out minutes to just also have part of the email be like, oh, and be sure to check these items on SharePoint to call our attention, because asynchronously we have a little more time to like peruse, and then it doesn't put the labor on you to read it out loud to us at the meeting. So that's my suggestion. Thanks.
This is Track. I can totally do that. Thank you, Ray.
And this is Hunta. I think a few times Track did have a calendar like of with the TEC meetings and added attachments with that, with the agenda, or excuse me, with the calendar. And so maybe we could do that same thing with SharePoint. I'm recommending Track that maybe when we add all links, it doesn't have to necessarily be in the agenda, but maybe just add a link or an attachment or something in the calendar so that when people receive the invite, then they can be, able to click on the link to access it right there. Because I know some people have a hard time accessing SharePoint, depending on the formatting too, if it's a PDF or not. And it'll save you some time in having to send things out over, a million times. So that might be nice if we just have an attachment right there in that email ahead of time. It's just another thought.
And if you'll give us 1 second, we're also switching interpreters now. All right, we're good to go. Thank you.
This is Track. Does anyone else have any other feedback on that? If not, I can move on to the next set of updates.
This is Hunta. I'm good. I'm good to go.
Alrighty, this is Track.
Next topic is, it's Track. It's you, please. You get to talk so much now. It's like you're presenting.
Yeah, today's agenda has more of me than is ideal, but that works. And yeah, I will commit to sending via calendar invites or email those updates as they exist. And if other folks have other things they'd want to see, including me not forgetting to send those questions to presenters, please let me know. But the next item on the agenda is updates on the TEC recommendations to council. that Kenzie and Hunta did an amazing job, especially through a number of tech issues, presenting yesterday. So big kudos to you both. And in a minute, I'll talk about updates on like where the items that we're making progress are at. But first, I want to pass it to Kenzie and Hunta if they want to share any reflections on how the presentation went or anything like that.
This is Hunta speaking. Kenzie, please go right ahead, and I can add at the end. So you're the co-chair. Please go for it. I'm the old one here, so.
Okay, so I will say, yes, there were a number of tech issues, but we really killed it, everybody. So not to toot our own horn, but and everybody on city council seemed to be receptive. We got a lot of really good compliments. And yeah, I felt very heard. So I guess that was my experience. I think I feel that we're all familiar with the recommendations that were made. So yeah, that is what I will say.
All right, and this is Hunta. And really, really appreciated people who bore with that actually struggled through the tech issues. Interpreters had problems as well with things disappearing. So there were so many issues that did come up, but it was successful. And then at the same time, I think maybe it was Andrea, I'm not sure, or it might have been another person. I forget specifically who it was. However, there was a councilwoman, Omar, had fabulous comments, really, and saying, of course, we have to listen. And there were some recommendations related to COVID-19 that were included as well, with LGBTQA and COVID-19. And people were saying that they haven't actually gotten to, hold on one second, let me just clarify. That we hadn't actually really talked about COVID-19 and how it's impacting specifically the LGBTQA community. And so Andrea did mention that. And so that's where we did want to add to this recommendation, and just saying, hey, Kenzie, you did an amazing job. Everyone did such a great job. So if you haven't yet watched that, it's on YouTube. So, the City of Minneapolis channel. And so you can see it there. It was yesterday, Thursday. And so you can take a look. It was amazing. It was amazing. Yes, we killed it. Mm-hmm. And I'll give it back to Track. Sorry.
This is Track. Amazing timing. My Wi-Fi kicked me out, but I got back in just as you passed it back to me. So I'm here. I love technology. And yeah, want to give Hunta and Kenzie another big shout out and let you know that multiple staff in IT are aware that it is very hard for guests to get into presenting on Teams Live, and particularly when we're also using ASL interpreters in that context, and know that that is a situation the city needs to improve. And it was a bigger barrier for you all than is ideal, to say the least. And the updates I will give, and these will also be in the minutes as well. I'm not going through every item on the TEC recommendations, because as you all know from many of you who helped edit them at one point or another, they're long, but I want to raise up the ones that are in progress or moving forward right now. so you all know what's happening. So in terms of housing, you all made a recommendation that the new single room occupancy ordinance, because it will involve renters renting in spaces that have shared restrooms, includes language about ideally gender neutral restrooms, and when that's not possible in the building, like people being able to use the restroom they want to use, put into the ordinance. Councilmember Goodman's office, since they are leading that ordinance, are working on that, and they will send me the draft bathroom language once they have it. So that is moving forward. Rent stabilization passed its first council vote. It is a long process that will eventually involve it being on the ballot, hopefully in November, and then needing to be passed by voters. But the first step towards it getting on the ballot passed in council. The language that redefines family in the maximum occupancy ordinance, so that not being legally blood whatever related to someone does not mean that you have too many people in your home. That edit is going through council this month. In terms of the trans equity grant requirements in our contracts with shelters and other homelessness response organizations, I am still meeting with community members to get feedback on our draft language. Councilmember Fletcher, Fletcher, spelling out loud is really hard for me, and I say that every time because I'm on recorded video and feel self-conscious, from Ward 3, is willing to support like any legislation that needs to happen with that, because he sees it as part of his role on the finance subcommittee. And he also let me know you all had a more open-ended recommendation around prioritizing affordable housing, and the city has been using their 2040 plan as a way to do more of that work around prioritizing affordable housing. In terms of training for landlords, I am working with regulatory services on that right now. Hunter gave me some feedback on some of the content around discrimination that we want to train landlords on. If anyone has other content they would want to see in that, please throw your name in the chat so I follow up with you, or send me a text or an email, even if you just want an opportunity to look at what we've drafted so far and see if you have thoughts. If we need to write any type of legislation, for example, to make this training mandatory, council members Cunningham and Ellison are both potentially interested in authoring that legislation. I am just writing down Hunter's name as someone who's interested, and in terms of improving quality of rental properties, the citywide zero lead poisoning plan is also coming out later this year. A lot of the credit for that goes to another one of the city's appointed boards, the Public Health Advisory Committee, and the council is kind of following the framework they developed. Does anyone have questions about any of the housing pieces? I know I just threw a lot at you before I move into the next bit. Becca, I see your hand.
Yeah, this is Becca. I just briefly on the definition of family in terms of who can be in a household. Can you say just a little more about that?
This is tracked totally, thank you. So it used to be that part of how the maximum occupancy for a residence was defined was around family, which was, I forget exactly how they were doing the legal definition, but it is being edited to just say a family is anyone you live with. And so you would be in violation of maximum occupancy if you had more people per bedroom than was safe, but it does not matter if and in what way you are related to the other people. Did that answer your question?
That was helpful, thank you.
Does anyone have any other questions on the housing pieces?
this is Hunta. And for housing, I did want to ask a question regarding, are we talking about apartments, townhouses, standalone houses? So, you know, housing can be such a range of different types of housing. Is there a specific category of housing that we're talking about here?
This is track. Great question. Thank you. I was using it more generally to cover as like a category for all of the different things we were talking about within here. Many of them apply to all the different categories of housing you talked about. But for example, the single room occupancy ordinance is specifically about making it legal in Minneapolis for people to rent out single rooms in a building that may not have like a kitchen or bathroom attached. And that's why we're putting in language around gender inclusivity in those bathrooms. So that one is a very particular type of housing, but most of this applies broadly. Did that answer your question?
Yes, all good. And that's where I need to take more of a look at this, because if we're talking about single occupancy housing as well, are they going to have disability accommodations for individuals who are deafblind, for their wayfinding, wheelchair ramps, and any kind of physical disability needs to be considered, because there could be many barriers there. So that would be one of my concerns, is just to follow up about disability access as well within that. That was all.
This is track. Thanks for that, Hunta. I don't think that ordinance is creating new buildings. I think it's just making it legal for buildings to be rented out in different ways than they previously were. But I can follow up and see what accessibility is looking like there, and if there are ways to put in regulations around anything new that's being constructed.
So the reason why I mention this is because some old structures are not compliant for disability access. And I don't know exactly how you call it, if it's a scam, or, you know, maybe people don't notice these types of things, that these things are overlooked. But, you know, these days we do have to play the game regarding and seeing what's included in the laws. However, what I'm talking about more is the very old structures. Clearly, they are not ADA compliant. And so I'm just wondering if you do have some more information about that, and whenever you do share the language with me, I'm happy to take a look at that as well, offer some feedback.
Totally. Thank you. I will move on to the next section then, and please feel free to jump in at any point with questions. The content that was summarized as safety and healing in the recommendations, one of those recommendations was around safe use sites for drug use, and Councilmember Ellison is interested in looking into that work later in 2021. Another was around banning the LGBTQ panic defense. We've determined that we can't ban it on a city level. However, a bill got proposed at the state level. I think like in the last week. I found this out today, but I'm apparently behind, and we are doing a quick turnaround to amend the city's legislative agenda for the city's intergovernmental relations lobbyists who lobby at the state level to explicitly lobby in support of banning the LGBTQ panic defense, which, if anyone doesn't know, is currently it is legal for someone to find out that someone is queer or trans and kill them and claim that they panicked upon finding that out, and that is justification for murdering someone. This bill would ban that defense, and although we can't do that on a city level, and the current state legislature would be an uphill fight, the fact that it has even been introduced and that we have enough time to get the city to turn around and lobby for it is progress, and I will keep you all updated on where that is at.
And Track, I'm sorry to interrupt, but why can't the city ban it? Why is it not effective at the city level?
Totally. I do not practice law, so I'm not going to explain this in the most technical terms, but to my understanding, there are ways that if the state defines something, there are restrictions around what we can define as a crime or not a crime that is not defined that way at the state level. I am not using the technical terms, but essentially, yeah, that is the best summary I'm able to give. And I am happy to try to find notes from my conversation with the city attorney's office if it is useful for anyone to have in a bunch more detail, but that is essentially what it boils down to.
Yes, please, actually. So let me see if I can find the right words for this. So, yes, I understand that the state, that the city still has responsibility and that they can't go against the state. But I'm wondering about all the cities. There are so many of them where they're complying and they do have to rely on the state. And that can take forever. You know, like this panic thing, you know, I'm thinking the city should be doing some of the same things, right? I mean, people live in the city, and I do understand this, that we have to follow state regulations, but it's not always reliable. And so how can we resolve this issue? What I'm trying to figure out, I understand the city can't do that, but I'm just thinking about, you know, like how long? I'm just thinking and thinking about this. And so I'm just thinking, please go ahead. So if a person is queer or trans and this, I don't know, help me to understand this, really.
This is Galen. I am also not a lawyer or someone who practices law. I don't even play one on TV. My understanding is that the courts and what is allowed to be given as a defense is something that is managed at the state level. We cannot tell courts, because especially my understanding is this also relates to what sorts of crimes are being committed. And we don't have the purview as a city to tell the courts what someone can and cannot say in defense of their actions. And the state is, but like you said, that's like a really rough thing to hear. But if you look at all of the other folks who have put through bans, it's been at the state level. And it's because of the same general governmental structure that cities aren't able to do it. It always has to happen at the state level. And we should also be clear.
Interesting.
That
wow. This is Galen. I'm sorry. This is Hunter. Just all I have to say is wow.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's also helpful to keep in mind that banning the defense or not banning the defense we're talking about what someone can use as justification, not that that justification makes it legal, right? Anyone at this point can say that they did it because they were panicking because of gay, trans panic, etc. But that doesn't mean a jury is going to take that as a valid reason and excuse their behavior based on that. So it's still incredibly frustrating that someone could say something like that, but it is at least not something that is legal per se to assault someone or kill someone because they're gay or trans.
Yeah. Well, okay. Because, you know, I'm fine to hold, if we can hold on 1 second, we're just going to switch interpreters.
And I can let someone else go, but I'm sorry to just go on and on about this, but yeah, I mean, I'm sure you can tell by my face. I'm thinking especially Black trans women are killed, and people just say, "Oh, I was shocked," you know, and then they go to court and say, "Oh, I didn't know they were a trans woman or a trans man or whatever." Yeah. And so it's like sometimes, you know, people will do some jail time, but maybe a shorter jail time because of the defense. And this is just so common. It's so common. And it happens in the city, but the state is the one that decides what's allowed and what's not allowed. You know, and this whole, like, even to have something called a panic defense, the term panic is like, oh, you know, oh, geez, I just doesn't sit right. So anyway, you know, there's people, you know, this has been a fight, I'm sure, for many, many years. You know, back to Marsha P. Johnson, Stonewall, you know, it's like, oh, people have been panicked for a real long time, you know, and I don't know. I'm sorry. I'm just, whew, makes me a little pissed off.
This is track. No need to apologize. You're 100% right. And it is, yeah, just affirming everything you said and hoping that we can get it banned in the state legislature this year, because that also would impact far more people than just the city of Minneapolis anyway. But absolutely affirming everything you said. Becca, I see your hand.
Hi, this is Becca. This is still a serious issue, and it points to some parts of our society not accepting us as transgender people. So I'm happy for the TEC to do anything it can to support the city's legislative agenda to get panic defense banned. And it's definitely an emotional point for me as well. So I identify with that, but I understand we may have limited steps that we can take as the TEC, but I would be all in favor of whatever we can on that front.
This is track. Thank you for that, Becca. Galen.
Yeah, this is Galen. And I know last time we met, we talked about, you know, knowing that this was probably something that we couldn't do at the city level, how we would potentially work as a council to either put together a formal letter or reach out to state legislators beyond just, you know, the folks in the city to even if it's only symbolic, you know, throw what weight we can behind the efforts at the state level. So I think perhaps as the city figures out their legislative agenda and stuff, we can try and loop into that, or even just do our own little independent, you know, putting together a letter in support of the legislation and get it out there.
This is Track. I really appreciate that. Technically, the T's, I'm trying to make sure I'm getting stumbling on my sentences. I want to share the instruction that's been given to me about what boards can and can't do advising government bodies other than the one they work for, so that you all can figure out the best way to respond, not as a limitation, but as a like better to know in advance. The TEC definitely cannot speak to other government bodies as the city, quote unquote, which is not what you're proposing. The only people who are required by ordinance in any way to listen to you, at least, are the mayor and city council, are the people who are a part of this government body. However, that doesn't mean, I think I partially just needed to work this out loud to make sure we were all on the same page, so thank you for your patience. That doesn't mean you couldn't write a letter as the TEC and say, like, we are members of the TEC. We've been appointed because of our expertise. Although we do not advise the state of Minnesota, we all want these legislators to know. And I think that's absolutely something you could do. The other direct avenue for something immediate that I will say is we're pulling together the documents to amend the legislative agenda. Oh, Hunter, were you saying something?
Yeah. I'm so pissed off I can hardly control myself. I was saying, get me to the legislature and I will say, I will get my ass there and I will tell them.
This is Track. I was just gonna say,
it's just driving me crazy.
Yeah.
So many people are killed and lose their lives, and yeah, I'm thinking, there's so much work that we do, and but to get the folks of the legislature to realize that we are human beings. Human beings' lives are lost. Trans folks are killed. So many are killed, more and more all the time. So, yeah, I mean, Track, I'm down. I think let's start whatever we can do to confront and the legislature and tell them at the state level, whatever we think. Let's do what we can. Enough is enough. However we can be involved, use our voice. We are resilient. So let's get started.
Yes.
Text, write a letter, whatever we can do.
I guess I will put the ask out knowing that this is not like an official TEC action in the same way because it's not towards city representatives, but is there anyone or any group of folks who would want to start drafting or pulling together language on a letter? If you want to put your names in the chat, I can record that in the notes for next steps and follow up. And the other thing I will say as people are putting their names in the chat if they want to is that the other thing that we're doing right now is pulling together the documents to get this on our legislative agenda, including writing up what's called a racial equity impact analysis around why obviously the pursuit of racial equity involves addressing this. I have access to some of the, I think, limited data that is out there on trans folks. But if there are if there is information or data that you would want me to include in the racial equity impact analysis that you think I might not have, please also shoot a message or throw your name in the chat. That is the other immediate ask, is pulling together all the documentation that we're going to use to edit our legislative agenda. And I'm seeing everyone in the chat and capturing that in the notes, and I do have a link to the language of the bill and can send that out when I connect you all. Thank you all. And as I hear other ways to testify or anything, I can also spread the word about those. The other things in this kind of category of updates are smaller things, but I know the TEC has been advising the city for years to actually represent the trans and GNC community in the photos that are on city documents. I have met with communications about, as they long-term update all of where people pull from to update the website, etc., getting trans stock photos in that. And the only other thing I will add in here is there was a recommendation around decriminalization of sex work. And there is a community coalition building, which the TEC policy subcommittee is connecting to, around repealing the loitering ordinance, which would be one small piece of this work. And we'll talk about that more in next month's policy meeting for folks who are there. But there are some council members who are already potentially supportive of this work and others who are interested in more information. And then the next categories are shorter, but the updates I have on training are just that Councilmember Ellison is also really excited to support some of this work, including co-leading on getting HR's Trans Equity Survey finally distributed. Councilmember Johnson is willing to work on restroom construction in city buildings, but I'm waiting for more information on his office on what exactly that means and what his commitment is. And in terms of recommendations you all have made around more support for appointed boards, CVP Jenkins, one of her priorities for 2021 is reforming the structure of appointed boards. And she's open to including your suggestions in those reforms. Does anyone have any questions? This will all be in the notes as well, but I know I just threw a ton of information at you. If not, I just want to thank Kenzie and Hunter for navigating the many emails that were involved in getting these recommendations out to most of the council offices and the kind of follow-up that went from that, because I'm sure that was full inboxes for you both for a bit. The next item on the agenda was a co-chair vote, because I know Cece potentially wanted to run to be a third chair, but she is not here. So we will move past that. And Kenzie, I will pass it to you to introduce subcommittee updates, unless I'm missing anything.
All right. We're gonna do a quick report back from the subcommittees. So if somebody from the training subcommittee wants to give us an update on what she all talked about last meeting, please, the floor is yours.
I think Ray, do you want to do that?
Sure, I can do that. So this is Ray, talked about a few things. One, we are getting ready to hire a replacement for Tyree. for the gender inclusivity training. So we talked about what interview questions would be helpful for any candidates. And then we talked about interpreter training, which Hunter will talk a little more about, but trying to get that up and running so that interpreters are trained before the summit for sure. And then they're going to actually be marketing and running it on a much wider basis than that, which is great. Also starting to talk about what training should look like for both city and park board encampment outreach teams. So both entities have hired teams that will go out to encampments of people experiencing homelessness and housing insecurity to do kind of what police used to do. And so trying to get in really early and be part of the training to make sure that anyone going into those spaces is trans competent. So it's really time sensitive, and the outgrowth of that is that a couple of people are going to start with building like a packet. I think Shora and Becca are putting together a draft packet so at least they can get some like paper training to start while we keep working to hire someone who could then do some more robust training later. Oh, and Ash, thank you. I think that's all I got, unless anyone else on the subcommittee has something to add.
I can add something. This is Hunta. My apologies. So as for the training, we have finally sent out, or we started advertising for people who are interested. My workshop for interpreters, I've sent an attachment to track. Via email. And people who are interested can join the workshop. I think it costs $40 per person. It's 3 days. So that has been sent out. Sorry, yeah, and don't worry, I will send it again. Yes. Yes, I will send that again, but I'm excited. People are excited and signing up, so that's great. To be honest, I don't know how many people we will end up with. I'm hoping that the result is that folks are ready for the summit that's coming up this year, and then I'm hoping it'll be a even better experience. Of course, you know, the ASL interpreters will have homework. They'll have to read some articles. There'll be all kinds of stuff that's sent out, and then I'll collect it for Saturday morning, take a look at it to make sure I'm ready for the presentation. And again, you know, we'll emphasize that this is not level 101. So yeah, I think that's it.
All right. Then does anyone from policy want to report back?
Is Destiny here? I don't know if I'm spelling that right.
This is Track. Destiny is not here, and I think Destiny's been going to training, not policy meetings.
Oh yeah, that's right. That's right. My bad.
This is Track. If no one wants to, I can just give a real brief summary and say that in the policy subcommittee meeting, I think most of the time was spent talking about primarily, I think, the community safety work. I gave a lot of updates on the process of getting the new mental health crisis response teams that will be going out to mental health crisis calls instead of police. The updates on that kind of request for proposals and hiring. And we spent some time just trying to figure out, like, what is the best way to create a space that's not just updates, and how to get information out in advance far enough that folks can react to it and feel informed enough about the information. And I am also going to try get in a better practice with both subcommittees and the general TEC of sending out draft agendas in advance for people to send me things they would want to see added to that in the hopes that that helps a little bit. But yeah, I would say a lot of time spent on that, and then gave a couple updates as well on housing work, more detailed than some of the stuff we shared today. And that is more or less what I'd share from that, unless anyone else who was there wants to report back as well.
Cool. Then if that is it for our report backs, then Track, you're up.
This is Track. I have too many updates today. And I'm gonna move through these quickly so then we can get into our presentation because I know Nikki is here. But in terms of the city's trans issues work group, the main project that's going on from that space right now is one that I also referred to when I was talking about updates on your all's recommendations, which is the piece around getting trans equity requirements into the city's grants and contracts with shelters and eventually with other types of organizations as well. I'm still in the process of meeting with both shelter residents and shelter staff to get feedback on the drafted requirements as they currently exist. As always, if you know folks that you think I should be meeting with or who would want to give feedback just in a survey format, please connect me or reach out. But I don't have any other immediate updates beyond that. I've been continuing to talk to staff at the county, and hopefully the county will also implement these requirements in their contracts, which would be great because they contract with far more shelters than we do. And with like more domestic violence shelters and other orgs that are in slightly different fields than than the city is granting to right now. And the last thing I will share is updates on summit planning, which is getting started. And I am finally accepting that we are in that season. The first summit planning committee meeting is going to be March 25th. If there is anyone who wants to be involved in that meeting who doesn't already have the meeting link, hasn't already let me know that, please, once again, just throw your name in the chat so I can loop you into that space. We meet monthly through June, every other week in July, and then every week in August and September, I want to say. Hunter, I already have the first meeting on your calendar, and I think maybe Coco, I definitely have an interpreter booked for that first meeting. And then we put out a survey to kind of get folks' feedback as the summit has grown and also had to transition to virtual last year about if the way it's currently structured is working for folks or what we could change. It is a much bigger and different event than it was when it was first streamed up 7.5 years ago. And the biggest themes out of the survey feedback, there aren't a ton of answers, but the biggest themes out of what we have is an interest in having more community members kind of shape and drive the event. So I would say if you know folks who would be curious about contributing to this in any way, whether it's presenting at it or helping plan it, please connect me to them or reach out. Sorry, there is a conversation about when the cats are getting fed happening in earshot, and I couldn't keep my train of thought. If they would need, like, if they wouldn't be able to do it unless they were compensated, we are trying to figure out how to make sure that more of the community member roles involve compensation. So they should totally share that, and we can try to figure that out. And then there is also a lot of interest in the survey in having the summit not just be one giant annual thing and that's it, but instead having like one bigger event and multiple smaller events throughout the year. I share that not to say that I or anyone has figured out what that's going to look like yet, or even know what capacity we have to plan that, but to kind of give you a heads up. And yeah, I want to open space for a couple minutes before we move on to our presentation to see if anyone else has things they want to see out of the summit or out of like events in general, if we are maybe moving to a more regular trans equity event structure.
This was Hunter. I do want to see more. I don't know if it's possible for us to be doing this all virtually online or in person. And so that I think we're going to talk about it more in April as we get closer to April about doing outdoor events, I think, because of, well, I recall, yeah, last year was when we did the virtual summit. Wow, time goes quickly. And so now I think we haven't decided as of yet if this year is going to be virtual or in person. And so maybe if it's in person, it would be a different conversation. But if it's virtual, then maybe, yes, we might want to have more events. I'm sorry. I love you all. And I have to go. I'll be right back. Please continue. I'll be back.
I love seeing all the pet cameos. Well, I will say this is unrelated to Hunter's point, but I did not attend the summit last year, but I was thinking, is there a, let me rephrase that. Are the events open to everyone? So like all events open to whoever wants to go.
This is track. Yes, historically, everything is fully open. There have been workshops within the summit where the workshop presenters have named, like, we really want this space to center youth or BIPOC voices or trans folks or something like that. But the event as a whole is open.
Okay. Because I mean, that's exactly what I was going to say. I think it is important to say, or to be more intentional maybe about, like, you know, if you're an ally, this training is for you, and then maybe these trainings aren't. Yeah, that like this event is for you if you are, you know, if you're a young person, things like that. I think that would be important. But that's all I'll say. That's just what I've been thinking about.
This is track heard. Legally, we cannot restrict spaces based on identity, but we can definitely name like whose voices are centered, and be really intentional about how we name that and how we support folks to show up in the spaces that will be most beneficial to them. Yep, and I'm seeing Hunter's comment about safe spaces specifically for BIPOC. Absolutely agreed.
this is Hunter, and I was typing, but really what I was saying is yes, more spaces where there would be specific voices centered, and then also, sometimes if everyone is together and then something happens, that when there would end up being a breakout space of the discussion of what happened. And so I think that sometimes we have to give some feedback to the people who are facilitating those spaces because of events that might happen within those spaces.
This is track, totally. Does anyone else have any other summit feedback? If not, we will pass it over to our presenter.
Well, also with interpreters. So for interpreters, really, feedback regarding the past summit and interpreters being able to get names and pronouns correctly. I'm not saying all presenters would have a script ready, but I'm just saying that if there is, what do they call this? Like if there's a last minute something that comes up and there's no script ready, we do need to have interpreters being prepared for the events that are happening. It's not just our responsibility. It is also the responsibility of the facilitators, the presenters, that everyone does need to have information ready to share with the interpreters for them to prepare best so that the information comes through accurately. I mean, also with the captioning, really, come on, about that captioning. So that's it, that's what I had to say for now.
This is track, absolutely heard. And yes, a continued commitment.
Mm-hmm. All right.
If no one else has anything, Nikki, I want to pass it over to you to introduce yourself and your work with Congresswoman Omar, and if you want to, the work you previously did at the city, or not if you don't want to. And looking forward to hearing anything you have to share with this group.
For sure. Well, thank you for having me tonight, Track, and everyone. It's great to be with those of you who I've gotten to work with or meet in the past. For those of you who I haven't gotten to meet, my name is Nikki. I am Congresswoman Ilhan Omar's Constituent Services Director. I work here in our Minneapolis office. I use they, them pronouns. Coming to you live from my bedroom in South Minneapolis, bunch of plants here surrounding me.
Nikki, can you slow down a tiny bit for interpreters? Sorry,
yes. So in my role in the Congresswoman's office, the bulk of my job is to provide casework assistance to our constituents. I do basically all of our work around immigration, IRS and tax issues or stimulus payment issues, issues with the U.S. Postal Service, consumer protection stuff. And then I lead outreach and engagement on immigration, environment, financial services, consumer protection, and LGBTQ community, which is what brings me here tonight.
And Nikki, this is the interpreter. Particularly when you do lists, if you would just slow down a little bit, then I can actually include everything. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate the notes. I'm so sorry.
That's okay. If you would just go back to the last one that you were talking about. I missed about half of that.
Sure. So just covering some of my responsibilities in Ilhan's office. So the issues that I help constituents with directly are immigration, taxes, things like stimulus payments, issues with the U.S. Postal Service, consumer protection issues, and then a bunch of other random little things. And then I also lead outreach and engagement in the district on environmental issues, immigration and foreign travel, U.S. Postal Service, consumer protection, taxes, and the LGBT community.
Thank you. Appreciate that.
Yeah, of course. I'll keep a little bit eye on you as well so I can track better. So the reason that I wanted to be here with you tonight is to give you a little update on a bill that Congress passed in late February called the Equality Act. In short, the Equality Act would add gender identity and sexual orientation to federal anti-discrimination laws. And it would do that in order to prohibit discrimination. So it would add gender identity, sexual orientation to the Civil Rights Act of 1964, the Fair Housing Act, the Equal Credit Opportunity Act, the Jury Selection and Services Act, and a few other federal laws that that are related to employment and participation in the federal government. I passed along earlier to track a handout from the Equality Caucus that hopefully you can look through if you have time or interest. Basically, it just does a deep dive into each of those individual federal laws and discusses why they are important and why ensuring that trans and queer people are not discriminated against in those contexts is important for our ability to exist in our society and access our full power as residents of our communities. So I mentioned it passed the House on February 25th. It is currently in the Senate's hand, waiting for consideration there. The same Equality Act was passed in May 2019, last Congress, but it did not receive any action in the Senate. At that time, the Senate was also controlled by Republicans, and so that's why nothing happened with it. There's still a lot up in the air around what its fate will be in the Senate. As many of you likely know, the Senate still has a pretty robust filibuster that prevents the passage of most policy without at least 60 votes, which would mean we would need at least 10 Republicans to support the bill. Or we could force through filibuster reform with just our simple majority in the Senate. Ilhan has been calling for the repeal of the filibuster, as well as to tackle other undemocratic elements of Congress, such as statehood for DC and Puerto Rico, if Puerto Rico would want it, as well as other US territories. And there's a variety of other sort of procedural elements that stack the deck in favor of the minority party, which is also, at this stage, representative of maybe 30% of the country compared to the 70% that is represented by Democrats in Congress. Some of you are probably familiar with the ruling that came out last year in June called Bostock, B-O-S-T-O-C-K v. Clayton County. This Supreme Court ruling prohibited discrimination due to sexual orientation and gender identity in employment contexts specifically. On day one of his administration, President Biden issued an executive order that directed federal agencies to apply that ruling to all other anti-discrimination laws in housing, education, the few things I mentioned earlier. The reason we still really need the Equality Act is that a future administration that does not support queer and trans equality could immediately repeal that executive order that currently provides federal protections to people. It's what we saw President Trump do basically as soon as he entered in office and roll back protections that were under the Affordable Care Act, Title IX, other areas that President Obama had protected LGBTQ people. So it's really important that we pass the Equality Act. I am optimistic that that with the energy that that currently is behind the progressive wing of the Democratic Party, and especially where the COVID relief package ended up. It's certainly not perfect, but clearly we are seeing that there is appetite to use the mandate that we have been sent to Congress with. And Ilhan and other members of Congress hope that the Senate is willing to do what this moment requires, repeal the filibuster, and pass the Equality Act, pass HR 1, which expands access to voting and strengthens the Voting Rights Act that was gutted by the Supreme Court a couple of years ago, and a million other important things that are desperately needed. The last thing I just wanted to share was a little bit about the COVID relief package that was signed into law today. I'm sure you all know that that included $1,400 stimulus payments. One of the new really great developments for this round of stimulus payments is that those payments are now covered for all dependents. So previously, if you had an adult dependent, like a parent who has a disability that you're caring for, neither of you would get the stimulus payments. Now the taxpayer will get the stimulus payment on behalf of their dependents, no matter their age. Similarly, mixed status families will also get stimulus checks. Previously, if a US citizen was married to somebody who did not have a social security number because they're an immigrant, neither person would get the stimulus check, which was just really messed up. There's a lot of support for local governments and schools. There's federal tax relief for unemployment benefits. And so for a lot of people, that additional $600 you were getting per week came with a surprise tax bill if you filed your taxes already. And now the first $10,000 of those benefits is no longer taxed on the federal level, which is really great for people who relied on those unemployment benefits. We also expanded support for gig workers, so that'll be like Uber drivers, other independent contractors, and also extended the additional payments that were going onto state unemployment benefits. And so that's at $300 per week. And then both of those benefits are extended through September 6th. And there's also a huge expansion of child tax credits, which is basically amounts to a sort of universal basic income for families with children. And for the poorest families in the country, that is going to basically lift like 30% of families of kids that are currently living in poverty out of poverty. It'll be like around $12,000 per year for families, which is so important. And then lastly, there's some additional health insurance subsidies. Obviously, we really need Medicare for all, in our opinion, but during this period where people are seeing surprise medical bills due to the pandemic, where people are losing their job and then their health insurance due to layoffs, it's so much more important that our government steps up and ensures that everybody has access to healthcare. So with that, I am happy to answer any questions that you may have. Well, oh, sorry, actually, one final thing. I heard the discussion around the trans panic bill, and just checked in with my DC counterpart to make sure that Ilhan will be co-sponsoring the federal bill that bans the gay and trans panic defense nationwide. That should be reintroduced in the next couple weeks here, and she will be an original co-sponsor for that. Oh, and that's my puppy. But yeah, if anyone has any questions, I'm totally happy to answer that. The other handout I gave to track is the casework overview of the sort of things we can help with. And so just want to emphasize, if you or anyone you know needs help with a stimulus payment, a missing tax refund, unemployment application not going through, a delayed work permit, anything like that, reach out to us. If we can't personally help, we will definitely get you connected with the people who can.
This is Hunter. I do have a quick question for you, Nikki. So from my experience, I've lost a few jobs actually during the pandemic. I do have SSDI, but of course it's impacted my healthcare coverage. And I do have some coverage, but I'm thinking, you know, because it's happening during COVID, and I switched from full-time to part-time, I've lost my health insurance. And so, this is all during like surgery, you know, going through the process of surgery too, and all during COVID. So I'm wondering, what's the status of that for people who do receive SSDI or SSI, you know, either one. I'm wondering if you know that their healthcare is going to be impacted, or if anything's going to change because of COVID.
Thank you for the question, Hunta. So a lot of the health insurance pieces that I am familiar with from this package are more about the being able to buy health insurance off one of the exchanges throughout this whole period. Typically, those exchanges are only open for like a month and a half period at the end of the year. And so this would reopen the marketplaces so that if somebody loses a job, you can go to the marketplace and get health insurance without needing to go through all of the additional paperwork process to prove you had a change in life circumstance, which was the previous requirement. The subsidies are also largely through health plans from the marketplaces, as well as for things like COBRA, which I believe is the one of the subsidies for low-income families, and specifically to provide healthcare for children. I don't know specifically in terms of what this bill is going to change for the sort of health insurance that people on like SSDI or like Medicare and Medicaid would receive. So I will check in with my counterparts that lead work on healthcare and like Medicare and Social Security and whatnot, and get some additional information on what's in this bill, and would be happy to follow up with you.
Great, and I'll add to that. I'm thinking specifically about trans folks in the surgery process. I have some friends who have lost insurance because of COVID, you know, and then they work part-time and have no insurance. So I'm just thinking, you know, it's not fair. You know, during COVID, all of a sudden we're stuck. There's nowhere to go. You can't find a job. So I'm thinking of people, especially people maybe that don't. I'm thinking about people specifically who have a disability and, you know, like I said, are likely collecting SSDI and then all of a sudden don't have a job. And then they're in the middle of a surgery process and, you know, we're in a pandemic. So I'm thinking about that sort of thing. There's a lot of people that are, you know, going through trans-related surgeries in the middle of a pandemic. And so I think it's good, you know, to have those kinds of conversations about what those impacts are, because people are struggling and, you know, they can't afford, you know, to pay their bills. They're maybe afraid to be even losing their home, let alone everything else that's going on. You know, so I also want to, you know, I'm grateful for all the work, but, you know, to have any kind of, or people are grateful for the work, to have any kind of work, you know, that can maybe cover some of their bills, but then there's no insurance and, you know, the story goes on.
Yeah. So I guess what the typical process would be if somebody loses their job and then loses their employer provided health insurance, would be to apply for one of the state subsidized health insurance programs like medical assistance or Minnesota Care. And for both of those are means tested, which basically it's just like if you don't have income, you show that to the state, and then the state would provide you either free or heavily subsidized health insurance. thanks to some lawsuits and settlements from Gender Justice and I believe Outfront and the ACLU over the last couple of years, the state of Minnesota does cover most transition care that is medically necessary. And so if somebody is in the middle of a surgical process, and this is the job, they should be able to get medical assistance. They might have to go through a process where you still have to do like pre-authorizations. The whole kind of, I mean, it's such a burdensome paperwork process to get any sort of like gender affirming surgeries in our current medical system. But that you might have to go through the pre-authorization process with medical care, with Minnesota Care or medical assistance, but those should be covered. And if they are refusing to cover them, then that would amount to discrimination that the Supreme Court in Minnesota has affirmed is not acceptable under the law. And there are a number of organizations that I believe would be happy to help represent people who are facing a denial like that. So if you know people who like either need help getting connected with Minnesota Care medical assistance, or if you know people who like are getting those pre-authorizations denied by their new health insurer, if you want to come to me, we can get you connected with the right folks who would be able to help you navigate those specific concerns.
Thank you so much. That's perfect.
This is Track. I also want to encourage anyone who has like things that they would want to see Congresswoman Omar's office bringing forward at a federal level. And thank you, Nikki, for the update on the panic defense to share those as well.
One thing I would bring up, sorry, this is Galen. One thing I would mention, and it came up in your response, Nikki, to Hunta's last question about when we have issues with medical necessity involved and the trans community, there's a big difference between what, medical organizations deem medically necessary and what states and the government considers medically necessary, and it's a fight that continues to happen in Medicaid, Medicare contexts as well. And I'm curious if there's been any movement on finding solutions to this sort of, ACA had, certain things in it related to medical care, but ultimately not enough. And I'm curious if there's anyone who's interested in doing that sort of work at the federal level, and if that's something that Ilhan Omar is supportive of or looking into.
Yeah, that's a really good question. There's one of the things that we have been working on is in kind of this vein is around the coverage of care that the VA provides to veterans. And so one of the reasons that's been a focus area is because the coverage of transition care at the VA can be achieved through a policy directive, like not even at like the secretary level or like at the executive order level. Like it could just be an internal policy memo that would automatically cover every trans veteran for transition care. When it comes to coverage under Medicare, I believe that the restrictions are written into law, which would require an act of Congress, and then in the current makeup, 10 Republican votes in the Senate as well. In Minnesota, because of the settlements that have happened over the last couple of years, are the state versions of Medicare, or like the programs that the state runs using Medicare and Medicaid funds do cover the stuff that Medicare nationally does not cover, or at least they are supposed to. And so I don't know that the Congresswoman has personally worked on fixing the Medicare issue, just because in our district that is not like the federal floor is not the floor in Minnesota, because we have the Minnesota Human Rights Act. We have a legal protection for trans people as early as like in the early 90s. And then we do have these settlements that are supposed to guarantee insurance coverage of transition care. But I totally hear you, and that just because it's not as bad in Minnesota, which is not to say that it's not bad. It is bad, and a lot of people are still beating their head against that wall all the time. A lot of insurance providers, just as like a standard practice, will initially deny many claims, figuring that people will just give up and not go through the whole process of challenging that denial. And I mean, certainly we believe that the Equality Act would help in that way as well, because it codifies equal access under the law in basically every area imaginable. And so right now, although we do have a federal executive order that says the federal government should consider that the law, that ultimately isn't the law yet. And so we're not going to be able to use, for example, the president's executive order to find a different like aspect of like what's in the law around Medicare as a like, we're not going to be able to undo the law due to the executive order. Whereas if we had two laws that were contradictory, one of them would have to go, you know? And we believe that under the like equal protection clause, that it would be more likely that the ban on what is covered would be the thing to go. But I will bring that idea back to my DC counterpart as well for consideration. And it very well could be that the Congresswoman signed on to a bill. She's co-sponsored like hundreds of bills, and so it's kind of hard to keep track of everything.
Yeah, this is Galen. Thank you for that. I know, you know, in terms of the current situation, I know that federal like legislative progress on a lot of these issues is going to be hard to come by, or like you said, relate to ending a filibuster or filibuster reform. I was just curious if it was something that was on people's radar, because there was a general feeling that I had that there were a lot of people who saw the ACA and, you know, inclusions that were put through with that as just like, oh, we're done, rubber stamp. And as someone who has had to navigate the process, we're not quite there yet. Even in Minnesota, even with what we have, it's still, you know, a bear. So I was just curious. Thank you very much.
100%. And I mean, ultimately, like, we believe the answer is Medicare for all, and that you shouldn't have an insurer that decides what is or is not medically necessary for you. Like the system that we have right now is fundamentally broken, and the reason that so much coverage for trans people is denied is because like queer and trans people overall just have less power in our society and are more easily able to be taken advantage of by health insurers, and it's ultimately about the bottom line. So yeah, I'll also follow back up with track to pass on information with you if I based on what I learned from my DC colleague.
This is Track. I actually have a question. Nikki, I don't remember at what point during our conversation about the panic defense and the Minnesota bill you jumped in on, but there was some conversation about like, okay, the city of Minneapolis can add it to our legislative agenda. I don't personally have a sense of how often Congresswoman Omar like provides any feedback or input or nudges around things that are going on at a state level in Minnesota. But I was wondering if she ever tries to do that, and if so, if some of both like the panic defense bill on a good end and some of the really transphobic stuff going through Minnesota legislator as well on a negative end are things you would want to like reach out to former colleagues about or anything like that?
Yeah. So I'll check in with her. It would have to, she would only be able to do that in a personal capacity. So like I couldn't reach out to her on my official time just due to ethical guidelines. I mean, she is certainly in active communication with with many elected officials in the state. I don't think that, I don't know, I guess my impression is at least of all the legislators in our district, I would imagine that all of them are probably original co-sponsors of the bill or would be if asked by someone. And so just in thinking of our constituency, we definitely have opportunities to bring things up. And so I'll certainly add that to our like next legislators luncheon thing, just to make sure that the Congresswoman is encouraging people to consider that. And yeah, I guess ultimately it's going to rest on a few people in the Senate here as well, in terms of whether it's going to be able to pass in the next few months.
That totally makes sense, and thanks for explaining the ethical guidelines. I was truly unsure how it worked. Does anyone have anything else in these last few minutes?
Hi, this is Becca. Nikki, thanks for the work you do. And I just want to put in another plug for universal coverage for healthcare. I'm one of the folks who's lucky enough to have an income that's decent, but I pay over $1,500 a month between my insurance coverage and my prescriptions. And it's I make just enough to slowly go broke, quite honestly. And I'm looking for any long-term solutions that we can work on that would help manage things in my situation, folks who are in that nice middle income area where the expenses are still really high.
Yeah, I hear you. I mean, I wish that I had good answers. It's I mean, it's a system that was kind of designed to do exactly that. The subsidies that we have in place are like very ineffective in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of people that fall between the cracks. If your employer offers something like a health savings account or something like that, and you haven't joined that, that might be something that would be worth considering. And at least if you're going to have to pay that much money on a monthly basis, you can not pay taxes on that money. But yeah, I'm sorry that you're in that situation. It sounds very, very frustrating.
Yeah, thanks. It's really I just wanted to highlight it's still an issue. And like I said, just put my plug in for whatever national solution we can come up with.
Amen.
If no one has anything else, thank you, Nikki, so much again for being here. And if any other questions come up, I'm happy to pass them along to you.
Sounds great. Thank you so much for having me. Have a great night, everyone.
Thank you all. And I guess I will pass it to whoever wants to make a motion to adjourn, unless anyone has anything else. Casey, I just saw you unmute if you had something.
No, I'm good. I motion to adjourn, I guess.
Second.
Wonderful. Thank you all. Have a great rest of your night.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Bye.
Thank you.